My name's Carolyn Foley. I'm the research coordinator with Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about our scholars programs. The main reason we're having this webinar is because these are relatively new opportunities, so I wanted to give people a chance to ask a couple questions or just hear a little bit more about what the programs are about. So welcome everybody. As I mentioned, I'm the research coordinator. This is my email, cfoley@purdue.edu. I am the main contact for this competition. So if you have any questions at all, or the people who are helping you prepare applications have any questions, please feel free to reach out, even if it's after hours or things like that. I work weird hours. So please feel free to reach out and ask questions, and we'll try to help. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, and the recording will be posted at this link right here, which I'll drop these links into the chat once I've finished the presentation. They are also in the request for applications, or RFA, and the link for the RFA is right here. I imagine you all have seen this already, but I'm going to say many times during this presentation, please refer to the RFA, and make sure you're looking at the RFA. All competitions are kind of governed by a particular set of rules, and so ultimately what's in the RFA is what we go by, because we've worked with the national office to work things out. So I'll give you a little bit of background on Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. So if you apply to these opportunities, you're not applying for a Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. You're applying for a grant from Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. We are one of 34 Sea Grant programs across the United States and US territories. If you're familiar with the land grant system, which is, there are land grant institutions, Purdue University is one, the University of Illinois is one. Sea Grant is an extension of that, where we receive funds from the federal and state governments to conduct research, education, and extension or outreach activities. What's special about Sea Grant is that our activities are focused on coasts, and you'll note that all the Sea Grant programs here, the little blue dots are Sea Grant programs. They're all in states or territories that have a coastline. This is us right here, Illinois and Indiana. And the coastline that we're primarily focused on is southern Lake Michigan. So it runs roughly from just south of Milwaukee all the way over to about St. Joseph, Michigan. It's densely populated, highly urbanized area where we focus much of our work. So the opportunity that you all are interested in, if you're attending this webinar, is the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant, or you may hear it called or referred to as IISG Scholars Program. In 2021, we have two opportunities open. The first is the Faculty Scholars, which this is the third year of this program. So you may know somebody or who has been a faculty scholar in the past, or you may have read about them on our website. So I'm going to give a couple of examples in a little bit about the types of projects that have been successful. Graduate student scholars, this is the first year we're doing this program. I have a little asterisk there because we had a program that was kind of similar to it a long time ago, but this is a new program, a new opportunity for graduate students to apply to get some funds to support their research and also do some other activities. So from here on out, pretty much everything that I'm going to say, a lot of it is going to be directly from the RFA. If you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll circle around at the end of the presentation and try to answer them. But you're going to hear me say over and over again, look at the RFA. And we'll also give a couple of examples of the types of projects that can work. So directly from the RFA, to be eligible for these opportunities, to apply for a faculty scholar, you have to be a faculty member at an institute of higher learning in Illinois or Indiana. And to be a graduate student scholar, you have to be enrolled as a graduate student at an institute of higher learning in Illinois or Indiana at some point during the 21-22 academic year. We put this at some point so that if you're at the beginning of your time as a graduate student or your end, you can hopefully still apply if you're in that in-between phase. It is important that all projects fit with the IISG strategic plan, which is available on our website. The strategic plan is developed with input from our stakeholders, the groups that we work with, and the public and things like that. And so all the work that we support with our funding has to fit with that strategic plan. And the strategic plan is also linked in the request for applications. Importantly, though, you do not have to currently be working with Lake Michigan and or coastal communities around Lake Michigan. So you could be doing, and I'll give an example of this in a second, you could be doing work downstate or in another part of the Midwest or something like that. If you can pivot, and with the money that you're proposing to do some work with a certain amount of money here, as long as it fits with our strategic plan, it could potentially be successful. So you don't have to have a history of working in Lake Michigan or with Lake Michigan coastal communities to be successful in this competition. For the faculty scholars, and these are our 3 faculty scholars from last year, you are eligible to request up to $12,000, and in the RFA, there's some mention of how much of that can go towards salary and things like that. Faculty scholars must demonstrate a 50% non-federal match. So as I mentioned before, we get funding from the federal government and also state governments. This is part of the setup, the way that Illinois Indiana Sea Grant is set up to work. What can count as match will ultimately depend on the applicant's institution. So my advice is to talk with your fiscal groups and say, what can we use as match? Some things that people have used in the past are things like academic year's salary and associated fringe, or if you have some equipment that you can bill that you plan to use to complete the work. Volunteer time can potentially count as match, but it has to be something that your institution is willing to support and have audited. If you have any questions, if your fiscal person says, well, can this work or whatever, again, feel free to reach out. And I can give the nitty-gritty details of what is allowed and what is not allowed. Typically, as long as your institution is willing to count it, it can work. But if you have questions, please feel free to reach out because I know match is tricky. So ultimately, if you requested the full $12,000, you would have to show at least $6,000 of match that is from a non-federal source. That's the most important thing. And so it would be a total of like $18,000 that would be going toward this project. During your faculty scholar year, again, this is from the RFA, you're expected to participate in networking events with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant staff and stakeholders. This is really intended to improve the outcomes of the work that you're doing. So most of the time people seem to enjoy the experience. It's not an extra burden. So then you also intended to develop a product and both a product and a research proposal to an external funding agency. Now I'm going to give a couple of examples of projects that I've worked in the past because this is a little bit different than a typical research project. So one example, William Bianco, he is a faculty scholar from Indiana University. He was working with the Hoosier Resilience Index, which is a tool for communities to try to assess their resilience to climate and things like that. And what he proposed to do, they had been working in the southern part of the state and around the middle part of the state. They proposed to adapt this to Northwest Indiana and work with communities up there. And so he's an example of someone who was not working up near Lake Michigan, but received funding to do so through the Faculty Scholar program. And this is an example of his students conducting an interview, a virtual interview earlier this year. With Dyer, which is a community up in Northwest Indiana. So that's one proposal that was successful. A second example, this is Pranshu Solanki from Illinois State University. And this is a little bit more traditional. What he's planning to try to use dredged material as a sand substitute. So whereas the first example was kind of adapting a tool to a new situation, this example, he's conducted a literature review on this topic. He's doing some experiments, and I think ultimately he's hoping kind of to use these as pilot data as he moves through other opportunities. And this is a picture of he and his student heading up under COVID protocols to collect some of that that dredged material. So The point here with giving these examples is to say that like, these are not the only possibilities, but the types of products that people could create are things like literature reviews or morphing things or things like that. It's really like we're open to lots of possibilities. They will be reviewed externally, and so I'm going to strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that you look at the RFA, look at both the application materials and the application review. This is what the external reviewers will be given to evaluate your application. So please review that when you're putting your application together if you're planning to submit. That's the strongest advice that I can give. Because ultimately, it's not me who makes the evaluation of each individual thing. We have some external reviewers to do that, to ensure we don't have any conflicts of interest. For graduate student scholars, you're going to hear some of the same things and some will be different. Graduate students can request up to $7,000, and again, there are some details about what types of things this can go toward. There is no need for match for graduate student scholars. So faculty scholars do need to demonstrate match. Graduate student scholars do not, and we're hoping that means it's easier for the graduate students to apply. The goal of the these grants is to expand the scholarly or societal impact of the applicant's research. So we're anticipating that this would be kind of an extension of work that you're already doing as part of your graduate program. And as part of that, we will expect graduate student scholars to participate in some professional development activities. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a second, and then present the results of their research to Illinois Indiana Sea Grant staff and stakeholders. Graduate student scholars, the intent is that it's really the graduate student who is driving the study, driving the work for the grant. However, the funds will not go directly to the graduate student. The funds will go to the graduate student's institution, which means they need to have someone who will accept the funds on their behalf. So they have to, in the application materials, you'll see that there has to be a letter of commitment from a PI who can accept funds. The PI does not need to be the graduate student's major professor, as long as there's someone in the department or the school who is willing to support the graduate student as they work through this work. The types of projects that we anticipate the graduate students might want to do, you could potentially conduct additional sampling. So whether that's sending out a survey to a slightly different audience so that you can do some comparisons, going in, collecting additional water or organismal samples or things like that, or sediment samples. That's one possibility that you could use to expand your research. You could try to fund some kind of modeling work, like if you're using land use modeling or other things where you can, if you were able to do just this extra piece, then that would sort of wrap your entire project together or things like that. Another possibility that you could consider putting in for our outreach activities, ways to bring the results of your research out to different groups who could actually use them. These are all things that Illinois Indiana Sea Grant would be interested in. But again, it does need to fit with the Illinois Indiana Sea Grant strategic plan. So if you're expanding out or you're pivoting a little bit from what your work is right now, just try to make sure you fit with things. And then also, again, review the application materials, look at the application review section of the RFA. It's a little bit different for the graduate students and the faculty scholars, so make sure you're looking at the right section when you're preparing things. But generally, it's quite similar between the two. But yeah, just try to make sure you have all the pieces and you've looked at the review material, because that's what people are going to be using to evaluate the applications. The types of professional development activities that we expect to share, and these will be no more than one per month, and nearly all of them are expected to be virtual. These are not meant to be a big drain on students' time because we want to be respectful of their time, but there'll be things like introduction to Sea Grant, effective communication via social media, which we sort of felt was something that we have expertise in and students might want to learn anyway. Integrating research and extension, which is something that we feel is really important to make research results relevant, and similarly connecting small-scale research projects to broader societal impacts. We also have connections to people who work in industry, to people who work in federal and state agencies. In the past, we've done things where we've had like panels where students can ask people kind of what, how to get jobs in different areas and things like that. So we would work with the cohort to sort of see what their interests are, and then we would try to develop some activities that are really relevant to them. So I'm going to escape out now and see if there are any questions. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in. I know this is probably not too crazy, but I don't see any questions being dropped into the chat. We're such a small group that if you want to unmute, that's probably fine too. I'll wait another beat. And again, if you have questions after the fact, the timeline for okay, so there was a question, what is the timeline for the Faculty Scholars Program? I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation again. Because the start date is, so application materials are due by 5 p.m. Central Time, and I'm going to go ahead and share this. 5 p.m. Central Time on March 12th, 2021. Please make sure you have them in by 5 p.m. Central Time on March 12th, 2021, because if they're after that, it's really difficult for me to not reject them. The start date for both the faculty scholars and the graduate student scholars would be June 1st, 2021. And then the expectation is that it would last a year. And this is outlined in the RFA as well. But so we hope that work would be completed by the end of May 2022. And I'll put this up again in a minute. Does that answer your question, Bob Kessler? Okay, no worries. That's, yeah. And again, this will be, this recording will be posted, but if you have any other questions, feel free to email. We'll do our best to help. There's a question, will the Graduate Scholars Program be held next year as well? We hope so. It will depend on, as with all funding from the federal government, it depends on actually getting funds. But yes, our hope is to continue this each year. But I can't say that for sure right now because it will depend on what funds we have available. So I will wait just a few more minutes to see if any other questions come in. And I'm making this recording very easy on the people who have to do the closed captioning transcription. Long pauses. Okay. So again, just if you plan to apply, please, 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 please don't leave it till the last minute in case something goes wrong with your computer. Please try to make sure things are in by 5 p.m. Central. If you have any questions, my contact information is here. It's also in the RFA. Feel free to reach out. And hopefully this helped at least a little bit for everyone to understand what types of projects we hope to support through this. And if you have any other questions, or if there are things like, would this potentially use as match, work as match, or I'll do my best to help answer them. So thanks, everybody.